The thumbnail. My beef with the Jehovah Witness via the suffering concept. I promise, right? If you stick with me, whether you're religious or not, you will undergo a shift, an enlightened shift. You're gonna see the sensibility in everything that I'm saying. And so let's get to it. The first thing that I want to address is that all religions, the root, the foundation of all religions is the prospect of suffering. Oh, Jesus suffered, right? Oh, he suffered for your sins. And so we grew up, we inherited to impose suffering upon ourselves. And so if you're religious or not, we still, all of us, grow up with a certain amount of suffering because it's been adapted into society. And so whatever culture that you belong to, most likely you will have a certain degree of suffering. And so I made a video addressing this 21-year-old female who was imposing suffering.
Is it worth the suffering? And with this daily suffering that I know what I'm suffering for, I'm willing to suffer for this vision. What I mean is, you need to suffer.
You don't need to suffer. You don't need to suffer. Then she talked about relationships that you have to suffer. Exercise that you have to suffer. I tried my best. And so this guy, the Jehovah Witness, chimed in and said, I watched your video. And it seems like you have a misunderstanding. I said there's no misunderstanding. I popped out of suffering. And so this is what I expected from this Jehovah Witness, hearing someone like me saying I popped out of suffering. Or any religion or anybody who supports suffering would ask me, a sane person would say, yo, how? What did you do? They'll want to inquire. What do you mean? Tell me. He didn't do that. Here's an interesting spin on that. I have depression, anxiety, anger, frustration, rage, right? Someone comes up to me and says, hey, Albert, I have a way out of all of that. Would you like to chat? And I go, oh, it's okay. I have a doctor and a therapist. It's fine. I've been diagnosed with depression, you know? And so it's okay, without hearing him through. I never gave him a chance. And so do you know how many people I tried to help with depression? And the minute I said, come on, let's exercise, I have a plan for you, pop you right out of depression. They said, oh, no, it's okay, I'm busy. Exercise, oh no. The very thing that's gonna pop them out of it, they're not willing to accept, and that's common. That's common with anger, with a whole bunch of problems that people wish they could get out of, but they elect to keep it. And so he elected to keep the suffering because it's under the umbrella of Jehovah Witness. And so because it's the foundation of Jehovah Witness, you have to suffer, then he's willing to stay that way. I popped out and he's willing to stay there, plus not understand me. When I told him so clearly, I'm out. I don't believe in the sense of anything. I'm just out. I'm free in that sense. He kept on. He kept on, which that's the sad part, because this means that he'll have that prospect of suffer. You have to suffer. Relationships. Oh my God, I'm suffering. He's going to carry that to the end of his life when I'm out. I told him I was entirely out, and he still pressed upon it, trying to explain. He says, oh, you don't understand. Read the Bible. Look at this scripture says this. And he started to read stuff that had nothing to do with what I was talking about. Now, what I mean by completely being out of suffering is that I no longer look for deeper messages to life. For example, she leaves me for another man. This does not imply that there's someone else out there better for me. Now look at the damage behind this. Because if I think that way and she leaves me and I don't find somebody else, then there's more suffering. Same thing with getting fired from a job. It does not mean that there's something out there better for me. Because what if I get a shittier job? And so I'm talking about how damaging relying on suffering, imposing suffering on my relationships so that it could be worthwhile, imposing suffering on work so that it could be worthwhile, imposing suffering while I'm exercising my body so that it could be worthwhile. And so at the end of my life, I can state that, yep, life is about suffering. No, it's not. So the most important aspect about this exercise is for me to look back to the days where I roller skated, fell, scratched my knees, my elbows, busted my head, and carried on with life without making it anything to suffer about. Without looking for any deeper messages, oh, this means to stop, oh, this means God is sending you a message. None of that exists anymore. That's what I mean by being out of suffering. Now, let's consider the foundation of all religions is suffering. Think about that for a minute, how twisted that is. Because we're talking about an almighty creator, the man who created everything, the man who created us in his image, has us destined to suffer. Bro, you gotta think of these things. Like he's a superior God who invented everything. What is he doing? Carrying emotions, getting sad, crying, oh, feeling gloomy, the Lord. A lot of relationships, if they don't suffer, they don't want to have anything to do with it. Now you have to think about that, how crazy and twisted that is. And so for me to say, as an example, I know I hit her at times, but I love her, is a derivative of God loving you and punishing you if you don't follow his route. Think about that. Now, to my ex-wife, here's a story. I was always open with her. She can do whatever she wants. Naturally, why not? She's a human being. She's an individual that has a life of her own. Her father came up to me and told me one day, oh, Albert, she's going out so much. Well, this Friday, don't go out. So she's like, okay, I'm going to get ready to go out. And I said, no, you're not. You're staying home today. And she went, really? You don't want me to go out? I said, no, stay home today. She said, oh, really? Oh my gosh, she was floored. She was absolutely floored that I put my foot down and told her. She felt so much love now. She already associated love with suffering. And so that's an example of how twisted we've inherited the prospect of suffering in relationships. Now, let's take a look at the work field, right? The work field, you gotta bust your butt. You gotta work how many hours a day and suffer. Maybe work 2 jobs and suffer some more and suffer and suffer and suffer. And so with my profession, which was music, I suffered through the whole thing because I already had associated working with suffering. And so just going to work was like, oh, I gotta go to work, I gotta go to the studio. I already carry that with me because I inherited that. And so that's the only thing I could spring forward, because if I sounded all happy and into it, then I would sound weird. This guy is like enjoying going to work? What? Wait a minute. You're supposed to suffer when you work, right? And so my life was like that because that's all I heard. Work, suffer, work hard, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs, and have absolutely no time for yourself. And so this here means that we're just following suit to what we've adapted. And so now, the fitness realm, oh, no pain, no gain, oh, doing push-ups, you have to suffer and suffer and suffer. This girl said that, and I'm like, no, you don't have to suffer. And I tried to explain why, because watch children. If you watch children, the children watch me doing push-ups and they copy me. They see me hanging, they copy. They see me jumping, they copy everything that I do. And I see absolutely no suffering whatsoever. So what's the deal with that? What's the deal that these kids that climbing, they're struggling, and they're not saying, oh, how much I suffered today. They're having a good time. So once again, the Rocky movies and all the action movies, someone is always suffering in the movies. When we watch the movies, someone suffers a lot, and then they get through, and then yay. And so we watch that, and we pick that up. And so we got relationships that we ought to suffer through. We got work that we ought to suffer through. And we got fitness that we ought to suffer through too. And so now, accidents. What happens? Oh, I had an accident. God is trying to teach me a lesson, right? What's the lesson here? Constantly waiting for a message to come from God about the accident that we're not supposed to have. But we must have had the accident because God put that there for us so that we can learn something, we can be closer to Him. Oh, I remember a lady saying that God gave her cancer to bring her and her daughter together. He gave it to her. Cancer involves suffering. You're sick. And so that's another thing. Sickness. To get sickness is always a lesson behind sickness. God gave it to you. He knows your destiny. And so sickness is associated again with sufferings. And so now we got suffering across the board. And so suffering. So now this is where I come in to make a whole bunch of corrections. Ready? Now I'm going to tell you how I now relate to no suffering. There's no such thing as suffering. Suffering is out of my life. And I'm going to share these points where I didn't get a chance to share it to the Jehovah Witness because he wasn't willing to listen. And if you're here, I promise that you will be shaken. Now watch this, right? I'm going to use accidents as my first example. Let's pretend I hurt my foot. Somehow I fall down or whatever. My foot is hurt. And so right there when the pain enters after the accident, the accident happens, I scream, I go ouch, and I attend the foot is the first natural course of action. Now, when it's addressed, and from that point it's just a steady wait of time to heal, that's it. You get it? That's it. There's no, God is trying to teach you a lesson. God, why did you do that to me? That part is out. Is out. I hurt my thumb. Same thing. I hurt it. I treat it. I go ouch. I bandage it up. Whatever I have to do. And then that's it. No, oh, what's the lesson? What am I trying to learn from God? You see, so now what I'm trying to convey here is that the pain, the body took care of it. I didn't let the mind interject with God, this and that. It must have happened for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. I didn't interfere with the pain that my body experienced. And my body, with way more intelligence than our thoughts, is taking care of it. It numbs the pain through its hormones and it does what it has to do and it goes through its natural process. I'm also not pressing on it to go away. Oh God, please take this away. I'm not doing that because now I'm stepping on the natural course of the pain that has to go away within its due time, not my thoughts' due time, or not me trying to ask God to make the pain go away. Now, with relationships, I'm 60 years old. The relationships, is over. I've been married, a whole bunch of girlfriends, been there, done that. And so all I could do now is relay this message to the young ones like I tried to do it with Liza, is her name. That's all I could do. When I see relationships and they are supporting suffering, I try to tell them all of this. And if I did have a girlfriend, I would try my best to get her to see this as quickly as possible so that none of us have to suffer or expect to suffer or feel that if she treats me bad, that she loves me, and that I expect turmoil in order for me to feel loved, because if I don't feel the turmoil, I might as well leave her like many people do. A lot of people who don't suffer, they go out and they find someone else that they can suffer with. And so I try my best to please take a look at what's going on here. How is it normal for you to say that you love this guy and do this to him, or him do that to you? Try to get their senses to clear up so that they don't equate love with suffering, because think about it. And so now, in regards to work, I'm a musician. I walk into the studio, I set up, and I start producing. Once I start producing music, my system becomes timeless. It always did. Therefore, when I take a look at the clock, it's 7 in the morning, and I started at 11 in the morning. So I'm around the clock, and so time just doesn't exist when I was producing music because I was so into it. Therefore, once again, my system took care of the music. There was no suffering involved in the production of music or while I was making music. It was all me just spewing what I inherited. Oh, I worked so many hours. I worked 40 hours in the studio. There were times that I worked 3 days in the studio. And internally, I loved it because of the production, the creativity that came out of me. It was freaking incredible. But it couldn't be incredible because I had to associate the 3 days with suffering. Oh, I was so proud to tell people how much I suffered too. Oh, yeah, Albert, where you been? Oh, I was in the studio for 3 days. Oh, and so now, the shift from that to this is that when I produce music now, or I exercise, my body gets down and just goes with the flow of it, but my system does. My system works out. My system produces music. My system gets involved in whatever creativity that I'm into, timeless without looking at the time, without any association with suffering. And so when I go into it, no matter how deep or how much I exercise or work, it still produces this incredible feeling because there's no suffering about it. There's no suffering behind it, and there never was. So I don't know if this is enough for you to be shattered, because this shattered me. I heard this years ago, and I popped out of suffering years ago. But this here shattered me, especially how much we inherited the prospect of suffering. Oh, mom used to tell me, you don't know how much I suffer as a mom. Dad too. Everybody's freaking suffering everywhere, bro. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Do we really have to carry this? And the answer is no. And so if you catch this, there's no work needed. You just see, oh my God. And then you can go to the gym and just freaking work. Move your muscles, do your routine, but try to figure out if they're suffering. If you see that there is and you still have it, go watch children and see if they're, oh my God, oh, the suffering is just overbearing. Take a look at it and then re-examine your relationships, the suffering that you endured. Examine those things for yourself. Examine your relationship with work, your friends, and everything. And hopefully, this is the last time you ever hear the word suffering in your life, because I do not utter that word whatsoever. So anyway, man, I hope this was useful. I hope this enlightened you as it enlightened me. And so anyway, until the next one, catch ya!